The Great Hall stretched for miles in every direction. Holographic figures of 1,000 different species floated in perfect circles around the central platform. Some looked like tall, thin trees with glowing leaves. Others resembled walking crystals that sang when they moved. There were beings made of pure energy, creatures that looked like giant butterflies, and things so strange that human eyes could barely understand their shape. Admiral Sarah Chen stood alone in the center of it all. Her dark blue uniform looked plain and simple compared to the flowing robes and energy fields that surrounded the alien representatives. She was the only solid physical person in the room. Everyone else appeared as shimmering light projections sent from across the galaxy. The Galactic Concord had ruled space for 3,000 years. Every major species belonged to it. Every world followed its laws. Every decision was made by careful discussion and vote. Until today, it had worked perfectly. The plague changed everything. It started 6 months ago in the Outer Rim territories. Nobody paid much attention at first. The Outer Rim was full of young species and small colonies. Bad things happened there all the time. Pirates attacked ships. Diseases spread between planets. Wars broke out over mining rights. The great civilizations of the inner systems had seen it all before, but this plague was different. It did not just kill people. It changed entire worlds. The first reports came from a human mining colony called New Canberra. The miners found strange crystals growing in their equipment. The crystals sang beautiful songs that made people want to touch them. When they did, the crystals spread into their bodies. In 3 days, every person on the planet had become part of a vast crystal network. They still walked around and talked, but they were no longer human. They worked together like parts of a machine, building more crystals and singing the same haunting songs. Then it spread to other worlds. The plague did not travel on ships or through space. It seemed to appear wherever it wanted. One day a planet would be normal. The next day, crystal growths would sprout from the ground, and the transformation would begin. The beings calling themselves the Zephyrians came with the crystals. Nobody knew if they created the plague or if the plague created them. They looked like living metal sculptures that moved like water. They arrived in ships that seemed to grow rather than being built. When they touched a world, that world became like them. The younger species panicked. They sent out distress calls and begged for help. Some tried to fight, others tried to run. Nothing worked. The plague spread faster than anyone could escape. That brought them here today. The Galactic Concord had called an emergency session. Representatives from every major civilization gathered to decide what to do about the Zephyrian plague. The Altarian Prime Calculator spoke first. The Altarians looked like walking geometry problems. Their bodies shifted between different mathematical shapes as they thought. They had solved every major galactic crisis for the past 1,000 years using pure logic and calculation. The data is clear, the Prime Calculator announced. Its voice sounded like numbers being added together. The plague spreads at an average rate of 2.7 light-years per standard day. It shows preference for worlds with high population density and advanced technology. Current trajectory indicates it will reach the inner systems in approximately 14 months. A ripple of concern passed through the assembled delegates. The inner systems contained the most important worlds of the galaxy. Earth was there. So was Altair Prime, the Vorthak homeworld, and the crystal cities of the Threnody Empire. However, the Prime Calculator continued, mathematical analysis reveals an optimal survival strategy. We must implement the Silence Protocol immediately. The Silence Protocol was ancient galactic law. It had been used 3 times in the past when the galaxy faced extinction-level threats. Every species would withdraw to their most protected worlds, seal their borders, and wait for the danger to pass. No trade, no travel, no communication between species until the threat was gone. Our projections show a 97.3. Percent survival rate for all compliant species, the Prime Calculator explained. The plague will consume the Outer Rim territories and then burn itself out within 5 years. We will emerge to rebuild what was lost. The Vorthak representative spoke next. The Vorthak were the oldest known species in the galaxy. They had existed for over 1 million years. Their current spokesperson looked like a collection of floating metal rings covered in ancient symbols. The collective agrees, the Vorthak said in a voice like wind through old caves. We have survived 17 extinction events using similar strategies. Patience and isolation preserve what matters most. The young species of the Outer Rim lack the wisdom to understand such sacrifice, but their loss ensures the survival of greater civilizations. More species voiced their agreement. The Krex war chief, whose people looked like armored dinosaurs, declared that even warriors knew when to retreat. The singing clouds of Andromeda hummed their approval in harmonies that made the air itself vibrate. The mechanical collective processed the data and concluded that sacrifice of the few preserved the many. One by one, every major power voted to implement the silence protocol. They would abandon the Outer Rim to save themselves. Sarah Chen listened to it all with growing anger. She had been born on Earth, but she had spent her life traveling between the stars. She had friends on dozens of worlds that would be left to die. She had seen the refugee ships limping into human space, packed with families who had lost everything. When the voting reached Earth's turn, every eye in the chamber focused on her. The human species was young by galactic standards. They had only joined the Concord 50 years ago. Many of the older species still considered them barbarians who had barely learned to leave their home planet. The Terran Federation cannot accept this decision, Sarah said clearly. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, only the background hum of the station's systems could be heard. The Altarian Prime Calculator's geometric form shifted into sharp angles of confusion. Explain your reasoning, human representative. The mathematics are beyond dispute. Sarah looked around the great hall at all the ancient species who had decided to save themselves by abandoning billions of innocent people. Your math might be right, she said, but your conclusions are wrong. You're not saving the galaxy. You're destroying it. Elaborate, demanded the Vorthak representative. This plague targets advanced civilizations first, Sarah continued. It's not random. It's learning. Every world it takes makes it stronger and smarter. If we run away and hide, we're just giving it time to grow. The Prime Calculator processed this for several seconds. Your hypothesis lacks supporting data. The plague shows no signs of intelligence beyond basic adaptive behavior. Then why does it always hit the most important worlds first? Sarah asked. Why does it seem to know exactly where our weaknesses are? Why does it create beings that can operate our technology better than we can? Several delegates began speaking at once, their various languages creating a chorus of concern. Sarah raised her voice above the noise. But even if I'm wrong about that, there's something else you're all missing. You're so worried about surviving that you've forgotten what survival means. The Threnody representative, a being that looked like living crystal, rang like a bell as it spoke. Survival means continuing to exist. This is basic logic. No, Sarah said firmly. Survival means being worth saving. If we abandon everyone who needs our help, if we let billions die because it's convenient for us, then what's the point of surviving? We'll just be empty shells hiding in the dark. The Krex war chief growled deep in his throat. You speak of honor, human, but honor does not protect against extinction. And extinction doesn't matter if you've already lost your soul, Sarah shot back. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some species supported the mathematical certainty of the silence protocol. Others began to question whether abandoning so many worlds was truly the right choice. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome never changed. The older species had made their decision based on millions of years of experience. Humanity was outvoted by a massive margin. As the final vote was tallied, the Prime Calculator addressed Sarah one last time. Your species lacks the experience to comprehend stellar scale loss. Your emotional responses cloud your judgment. We regret that humanity has chosen to exclude itself from the survival strategy. Sarah stood straighter and looked directly into the shifting mathematical patterns that served as the Altarian's face. Then let us gain that experience. When you're all hiding behind your shields and barriers, we'll be out there fighting for everyone you abandoned. And when this is over, the galaxy will remember who stood up and who ran away. The transmission ended. The holographic delegates vanished, one by one, as their species began implementing the silence protocol. Soon, Sarah stood alone in the vast chamber, with only the hum of machinery for company. She activated her communication device and sent a message back to Earth. This is Admiral Chen. The Conquered has voted to abandon the Outer Rim. All human forces are to begin immediate evacuation and defense operations for any species requesting assistance. We're on our own now. The response came quickly from Fleet Command on Earth. Understood, Admiral. All available ships are moving to the Rim. We'll hold the line as long as we can. Sarah looked around the empty chamber one more time. For 3,000 years, this place had been the center of galactic civilization. Today, it had chosen to become a tomb for its own ideals. She walked to the observation deck and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the plague was spreading, worlds were dying. People were calling for help that would never come, but they would not die alone. Humanity might be young and inexperienced, but they understood something the ancient species had: forgotten. Sometimes the right choice was also the dangerous choice. Sometimes you had to risk everything to save what mattered most. The galaxy had chosen silence. Humanity would speak with fire. As her ship prepared to leave the Concord station, Sarah received reports from across human space. Every available vessel was being loaded with supplies and volunteers. Scientists were working around the clock to understand the plague. Military commanders were drawing up plans for operations in hostile territory. Earth's colonies might be small compared to the great cities of the inner systems. Human technology might be primitive compared to species that had traveled the stars for millennia. But humanity had something else. They had the stubborn refusal to give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. The plague was spreading faster than ever. Ancient worlds were falling silent as their populations were transformed into crystal networks. The great civilizations were sealing their borders and preparing to wait out the storm. But in the darkness between the stars, human ships were moving toward the danger instead of away from it. They carried doctors and engineers, soldiers and teachers, everyone who was willing to help strangers they had never met. The galaxy had turned its back on the Outer Rim. Others had fallen silent in the face of extinction. Now it was time to see what happened when humans spoke with fire. Captain Marcus Torres watched the tactical display with growing dread. Red symbols filled the screen, each one representing a Zephyrian bioship. They moved through space like a swarm of metal insects, heading straight for Kepler 442b, the planet. Below held 12 million people from 6 different species. They had 3 hours before the plague arrived. "How many ships do we have?" Marcus asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Kim checked her console. 14 destroyers, 6 cruisers, and 2 battleships. The refugee convoy has 43 civilian vessels, but they're loaded with families and supplies. They can't fight. Marcus nodded grimly. 22 military ships against what looked like 300 bioships. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to lose, but losing was not the same as failing. The mission was clear. Buy time for the evacuation. Get as many people off the planet as possible before the plague took hold. If they could save even half the population, it would be worth it. Signal all civilian ships, Marcus ordered. Begin evacuation immediately. Military vessels will form a defensive line between the planet and the approaching fleet. The next 2 hours were chaos. Civilian ships dropped into the planet's atmosphere and loaded refugees as fast as their cargo bays could hold them. Families brought only what they could carry. Children cried as they were separated from pets and toys. Adults wept as they watched their homes disappear behind them. Marcus had seen refugee operations before, but this was different. These people were not just fleeing war or disaster. They were running from something that would erase their very identity. The plague did not kill people in any normal sense. It changed them into something else entirely. The crystal networks preserved their memories and skills, but everything that made them individuals was lost. The bioships arrived exactly when the computers predicted they would. Marcus watched them drop out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Each ship looked like it had been grown rather than built. They had organic curves and surfaces that seemed to shift and flow. Some were small and fast, darting between larger vessels like pilot fish around sharks. Others were massive, their hulls covered in crystal growths that pulsed with strange light. "All ships, engage the enemy," Marcus broadcast on the fleet channel. "Our job is to hold them here. Every minute we buy means more lives saved." The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Missiles streaked across space, trailing fire. Energy beams cut through the darkness like swords of light. The Zephyrian bioships returned fire with weapons that defied understanding. Some shot living metal that sought out targets like hunting animals. Others fired beams that seemed to age. Whatever they touched, causing hull metal to rust and crumble in seconds. The battle was fierce but hopeless. Human ships fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. The bioships adapted to human tactics within minutes, changing their formation and weapons to counter every strategy. Marcus watched his fleet die around him. The destroyer Valiant exploded in a ball of fire when crystal spears pierced its reactor. The cruiser Endeavor simply stopped working when alien nanobots invaded its systems and turned its own weapons against it. One by one, the human ships were overwhelmed, but they were buying precious time. Every minute the fleet held meant another 1,000 refugees escaped the planet. Marcus could see the civilian ships climbing toward orbit, their holds packed with survivors. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim called out, "the last refugee ship is clear of the planet. All civilians are safe." Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done it. 12 million people would live to see another day. The cost had been terrible, but the mission was complete. "All remaining ships, begin withdrawal," he ordered. "We've done what we came to do." But as the surviving human vessels tried to retreat, the bioships moved to surround them. The largest Zephyrian vessel, a massive creature that looked like a metal whale, positioned itself directly in their escape route. Crystal growths along its hull pulsed with increasing intensity. "They're not going to let us go," Kim said quietly. Marcus studied the tactical display. The bioships had formed a perfect cage around the human fleet. There was no way out that did not lead through overwhelming enemy fire. His ships were damaged and running low on ammunition. A fighting retreat would just mean a slower death. But there was one option left. "Get me a direct line to all refugee ships," Marcus said. "Channel open, sir." Marcus took a deep breath. "This is Captain Torres to all civilian vessels. You are clear to jump to hyperspace. Take these people to safety and tell everyone what happened here. Tell them that humanity stands by its word. We said we would protect you, and we did." He turned to his bridge crew. "Lieutenant Kim, set the reactor to overload. Maximum yield." Kim's face went pale, but she did not hesitate. Reactor overload initiated. 30 seconds to detonation. Marcus activated the ship's intercom. "This is the captain. All hands, it has been an honor serving with you. Our sacrifice here will save millions of lives. That is a trade any warrior would be proud to make." He switched back to the fleet channel. "All ships, this is Indomitable. We are going to ram the largest bioship. Use the confusion to break through their lines. Get home safe." The human destroyer accelerated toward the whale-like bioship. The alien vessel tried to move away, but it was too large and slow. Crystal weapons fired at the approaching ship, tearing holes in its hull, but nothing could stop its momentum. Marcus watched the bioship grow larger on his screen. At the last second, he could see movement inside its transparent sections. The Zephyrians were not evil monsters. They were just different, following their own nature. But that nature threatened everything human civilization held dear. "For humanity," he said quietly. The Indomitable struck the bioship just as its reactor exploded. The combined forces tore both vessels apart in a blast of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. The explosion created a gap in the Zephyrian formation, and the surviving human ships raced through it toward hyperspace. As the refugee convoy jumped to safety, the remaining bioships moved toward Kepler 442b. The planet's transformation began immediately. Crystal growths sprouted from the surface like a disease. Within hours, the empty cities would be filled with new crystal structures, and the planet would become another node in the vast network that was spreading across the galaxy. But 12 million people had escaped that fate. They carried with them the story of Captain Torres and his crew, who had chosen to die rather than abandon those who needed help. News of the battle spread quickly through human space. Earth's military commanders studied the recordings and tried to understand how the bioships worked. Scientists analyzed the wreckage that had been recovered. Engineers worked to design better weapons and defenses. But the most important result was something that could not be measured or analyzed. The story of Kepler 442 gave humanity something to believe in. It showed that their choice to fight instead of hide was not just noble suicide. It could work. Lives could be saved. More refugee ships began arriving at human worlds. Not just humans fleeing the plague, but alien species whose own governments had abandoned them. The singing clouds of Andromeda sent a delegation to Earth asking for protection. A group of young Krex warriors defied their elders and requested permission to join human forces. Even some of the ancient species began to have doubts. The Threnody Empire tried to maintain the silence protocol, but reports filtered out of crystal cities where young Threnody watched human news broadcasts and questioned their leaders' decisions. Earth's government faced impossible choices. Every refugee they accepted meant fewer resources for defense. Every world they tried to protect stretched their forces thinner. The plague was spreading faster than ever, and humanity's military was already badly outnumbered. But they kept fighting anyway. Human ships appeared wherever the bioships attacked. Sometimes they won, saving entire planets from transformation. More often they lost, but they always made the plague pay a price for its victories. The galaxy watched in amazement as this young species threw itself against impossible odds again and again. Military analysts from the inner systems studied human tactics and declared them suicidal. Philosophers debated whether humanity was showing incredible courage or incredible stupidity. Admiral Sarah Chen, now commanding the human fleet from her flagship Defiance, did not care what the galaxy thought. She cared about the reports coming in from the front lines. Human losses were mounting every day. Entire colonies had been evacuated or lost. The plague was learning from each encounter, developing new tactics and weapons. But something else was happening too. The plague's advance was slowing down. Instead of spreading freely through the outer rim, it now had to fight for every system. Human interference was disrupting its patterns and forcing it to commit more resources to each attack. Other species began to notice. The Altarian Prime calculator released updated projections showing that the plague's spread was 20% slower than originally predicted. The Vorthak Collective admitted that human actions were having unexpected effects on the crisis. Sarah read these reports with mixed feelings. Humanity was making a difference, but the cost was terrible. Earth's colonies were being abandoned one by one. The home fleet was down to 60% of its original strength. If the plague turned toward the inner systems now, there would be nothing left to stop it. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, there were more refugee ships to escort, more worlds to defend, more people to save. The galaxy might have chosen silence, but humanity would keep speaking with fire until there was no one left to listen. In the depths of space, bioships gathered in massive fleets. The Zephyrian network was learning too. It had studied human tactics and developed new strategies. Soon it would be ready to move beyond the outer rim and challenge the great civilizations. That thought they were safe behind their barriers. The real war was just beginning. Captain Elena Vasquez stared at the tactical display and felt her heart break. The Proxima system was lost. 3 human colonies, 40 billion people from a dozen species, and the largest shipyard outside of Earth's solar system. All of it was about to fall to the plague. The bioships had arrived in force this time. Instead of the usual swarm tactics, they had brought massive constructor vessels that began building crystal networks in space itself. The infection was spreading through the asteroid belt, turning mining stations into relay nodes for the Zephyrian. Collective. Captain, her science officer reported, the crystalline growth rate has accelerated beyond all projections. At current speed, Proxima B will be fully infected within 6 hours. Elena closed her eyes and tried to think. Her task force had 12 ships against what looked like 500 bio-vessels. A direct assault would be suicide. A fighting retreat would just delay the inevitable. But there was another option. One that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Get me a connection to Fleet Command," she ordered. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen. The Admiral looked older than her 50 years, worn down by months of losing battles and watching worlds die. "What's your status, Captain?" "The system is lost, Admiral, but I have an idea. If we deny the plague the resources here, we might slow down their expansion into the next sector." Chen's expression darkened. "Explain." Elena called up a holographic display of the Proxima system. "The asteroid belt contains enough raw materials to build 1,000 bioships. If the plague gets control of it, they'll have a major construction base only 6 light years from Earth. But if we destroy the belt, you're talking about detonating antimatter charges in the asteroid field," Chen said slowly. "The explosion would sterilize everything within a light hour of the star. That includes Proxima B. The planet is already infected," Elena pointed out. "The people there are gone. All that's left are crystal puppets wearing their faces. But if we act now, we can prevent the plague from using this system as a staging ground." Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Captain, you're talking about destroying an entire star system. 40 billion people still live on that planet, even if they've been changed by the plague. Some of our scientists think the crystalline transformation might be reversible." Elena had heard those theories. She had also seen the plague victims up close. They walked and talked and even remembered their old lives, but something essential was missing. The spark that made them individuals was gone, replaced by cold collective purpose. "Admiral, I've studied the bioship construction patterns. If they complete their work here, they'll be able to build faster than we can destroy them. This might be our last chance to slow them down." The connection was silent except for static. Elena could imagine the debate happening in Earth's command center. Military necessity against moral principles. The needs of the many against the lives of the transformed. Finally, Chen spoke. "The decision is yours, Captain. You're the one who has to live with it." Elena looked around her bridge crew. These people had followed her through a dozen impossible battles. They had watched friends die and worlds burn. They deserved better than this choice. "Helm, take us into the asteroid belt. Science team, prepare antimatter charges for maximum dispersion. All other ships, begin withdrawal to minimum safe distance." Her tactical officer, a young man named Harrison, looked up from his console. "Captain, the other ships are refusing to withdraw. They say if we're staying, they're staying." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. "Signal all vessels. This is not a suicide mission. We're going to plant the charges and get out before detonation. But I need volunteers to stay behind and make sure the bioships don't interfere with the operation." Every ship in the task force volunteered. The next 4 hours were a nightmare of running battles through the asteroid field. Human ships darted between floating mountains of rock and ice, planting antimatter charges while bioships pursued them. The crystalline growths were spreading faster now, turning asteroids into relay nodes and construction platforms. Elena watched her fleet die around her, one ship at a time. The destroyer. Courageous was overwhelmed by crystal tendrils that punched through its hull like needles. The cruiser. Steadfast sacrificed itself to clear a path for the charge-laying teams. Each loss bought a few more minutes, a few more charges. Placed in critical locations. Last charge is in position, her science officer reported. Detonation in 60 seconds. All ships, withdraw to safe distance, Elena ordered. Emergency jump on my signal. But as the human ships tried to retreat, the bioships moved to block their escape routes. The plague had learned from previous encounters. It was not going to let the humans destroy another system. Elena looked at the countdown timer. 30 seconds until detonation. Her ships were still too close to the blast zone. The antimatter explosion would kill everyone in the asteroid belt, including her own people. She could abort the detonation, save her crews, and let the plague have the system. It would be the safe choice, the human choice. But it would also mean that millions more people would die when the bioships built here attacked other worlds. Captain, Harrison said quietly, we can't make it to safe distance in time. Elena nodded. She had known this was a possibility from the beginning. Signal all ships. Tell them it has been an honor, and patch me through to the Proxima B colonial network. The screen flickered and showed the transformed landscape of Proxima B crystal spires reached toward the sky where cities used to stand. The people moved with mechanical precision, their eyes glowing with inner light. They were building something massive, a structure that would reach into space itself. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of Earth Fleet, she broadcast on all frequencies. To any part of you that still remembers being human or Altarian or Krex or any of the other species you used to be, I'm sorry. We tried to save you. We tried to find another way. But we can't let the plague use this system to hurt others. One of the crystal figures on the planet looked up at the sky. For just a moment, Elena thought she saw something familiar in its glowing eyes. Pain, maybe, or understanding. Detonation in 10 seconds, her science officer announced. Elena closed her eyes and thought of Earth. Blue oceans and white clouds, green forests and golden fields, children playing in parks where crystal spires would never grow. For humanity, she whispered. The antimatter charges detonated simultaneously throughout the asteroid belt. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. In an instant, billions of tons of rock and ice became superheated plasma. The shock waves swept through the system, shattering planets and extinguishing the star itself. When the light faded, the Proxima system was gone. Nothing remained but cooling gas and radioactive debris. The bioships, the crystal networks, the transformed colonists, Elena's task force, all of it had been erased in a moment of nuclear fire. The news of Proxima's destruction spread across human space like wildfire. Some called Elena a hero who had saved countless lives by denying resources to the enemy. Others called her a war criminal who had murdered billions of plague victims, who might have been saved. The debate raged in Earth's government for weeks. Military commanders argued that desperate times required desperate measures. Civilian leaders demanded that such tactics never be used again. Religious groups held memorial services for the lost while scientists studied the explosion's effects on plague expansion. But in the refugee camps scattered across human worlds, the reaction was different. Alien survivors who had escaped the plague understood what Elena had done. They had seen their own people transformed into crystal puppets. They knew that death was sometimes kinder than the alternative. The Threnody refugees wept liquid silver and sang songs of mourning in their crystal voices. The young Krex warriors roared approval for a warrior's choice. Even the few Altarian survivors, their mathematical minds struggling with emotional concepts, calculated that Elena's sacrifice had saved more lives than it cost. Admiral Chen stood in her office aboard the Defiance, reading casualty reports and refugee statistics. The numbers were staggering. Humanity had lost 60% of its colonies and half its military strength. Earth itself was packed with refugees from 100 different worlds. Resources were running low and morale was breaking. But something else was happening. The plagues. Expansion had slowed dramatically after Proxima's destruction. Without access to the asteroid belt's resources, the bioships were forced to move more slowly, taking time to gather materials from each conquered system. Other species began to take notice. The Altarian Prime Calculator released new projections, showing that human interference had delayed the plague's arrival in the inner systems by almost 2 years. The Vorthak Collective admitted that their mathematical models had not accounted for such irrational sacrifice. Even the Kreks, whose own warriors remained trapped behind the Silence Protocol barriers, began sending coded messages of support. Young Kreks' voices spoke of honor and sacrifice, concepts their elders claimed to have abandoned. But the most unexpected response came from the Mechanical Collective, an ancient race of artificial intelligences that had not communicated with organic species for centuries. Their message was brief and cryptic. Query: what is the nature of courage? Observation: humans choose destruction over corruption. Analysis: this behavior defies all programming logic. Conclusion: we require further data. Chen smiled grimly as she read the message. The galaxy was watching humanity burn itself out in a futile war against impossible odds. They were documenting human tactics and studying human psychology, but they were not understanding the most important thing. Humanity was not fighting to win. They were fighting because it was right. The plague was learning too. Each encounter with human forces taught it new lessons about warfare and strategy. The bioships were adapting, becoming stronger and smarter. Soon they would be ready to challenge the great civilizations hiding behind their barriers. But humanity had taught them something else as well. Resistance was possible. Sacrifice could change the course of history. And sometimes the choice between honor and survival was no choice at all. In the depths of space, new bioship fleets were forming. The Zephyrian network was preparing for its next phase of expansion. The inner systems lay ahead, full of ancient worlds and powerful technologies. But first, it would have to finish dealing with humanity. The plague had learned to respect this young species that chose to burn rather than bow. The next battles would be different, deadlier, more desperate than anything that had come before. Elena Vasquez would not live to see them. But her choice at Proxima had changed the course of the war. She had shown the galaxy that some things were worth any price to preserve. The plague could transform bodies and minds, but it could not transform the human spirit. And that spirit was spreading through the refugee camps and alien colonies, teaching other species what it meant to choose hope over fear. The galaxy had turned its back on the outer rim. Others had fallen silent in the face of extinction. But humanity's voice was growing louder, and others were beginning to listen. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the greatest cultural treasure in the galaxy prepare to die. The nexus of Altair hung in space before them like a jewel made of metal and light, home to 50 million beings. From every known species, it was where the galaxy's greatest artists, thinkers, and dreamers came to share their work. Now it was doomed. Bioship scouts have been detected in the outer system, her tactical officer reported. The main plague. Fleet will arrive in 18 hours. Sarah nodded grimly. The pattern was always the same. First came the scouts, spreading crystal seeds throughout a system. Then the constructor ships arrived to build the infection networks. Finally, the transformation began, turning entire worlds into nodes in the Zephyrian collective. The Nexus had tried to prepare for this moment. When the plague first appeared, the station's governing council had installed the most advanced defense systems in the galaxy. Quantum barriers that could stop any known weapon, temporal shields that slowed time itself around the station, energy, fields that made the entire structure exist slightly outside normal space. But the plague had learned to overcome every defense. The bioships carried weapons that seemed to evolve during battle, adapting to whatever they faced. Worse, the plague had begun using psychological warfare, broadcasting images of transformed loved ones to break defenders' will to fight. "Signal from the Nexus, Admiral," her communications officer announced. "The Altarian Oversight Committee is requesting immediate evacuation support." Sarah almost laughed. For months, the Altarians had ignored human requests for help. They had calculated that the plague would never reach the inner systems. They had declared human sacrifice, statistically, irrelevant. Now they wanted humanity to save them. "Put them through," Sarah ordered. The main screen showed the Altarian Prime calculator, its geometric form twisted into shapes that suggested extreme stress. Behind it, Sarah could see the Nexus's great cultural halls filled with artwork from 1,000 worlds, sculptures that sang in languages no longer spoken, paintings that showed the dreams of species that had gone extinct millions of years ago, books written in symbols that changed meaning as you read them. "Admiral Chen," the Prime calculator said, its voice distorted by mathematical anxiety. "Our defensive projections have failed. The plague's adaptation rate exceeds our computational models. We require immediate evacuation assistance." Sarah studied the alien for a moment. "I'm looking at our fleet disposition calculator. We have 37 operational vessels. Your evacuation requirements call for at least 200 ships to move 50 million people. We don't have the capacity." "Then prioritize the most valuable individuals," the calculator replied without hesitation. "Save the irreplaceable minds and artistic treasures. The rest can be sacrificed for the greater good." Sarah felt her jaw clench. The calculator was asking her to abandon 40 million people to save 10 million important ones. It was the same logic that had led to the Silence Protocol. Save the valuable, sacrifice the expendable. "That's not how we do things," Sarah said coldly. "Admiral, you must understand the mathematical reality," the calculator insisted. "These are the galaxy's greatest treasures. Their loss would be culturally catastrophic." "Simple pragmatism demands—" "Pragmatism," Sarah interrupted. "Demanded that you help us fight this plague 6 months ago. You chose to hide instead. Now you want us to choose who lives and who dies based on how important you think they are." The calculator's form shifted into angular confusion. "What alternative do you propose? Your fleet cannot evacuate 50 million beings." Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew had followed her through dozens of impossible battles. They had watched entire star systems die. They had seen friends transformed into crystal puppets. But they had never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to save everyone they could. "We're going to evacuate the entire Nexus," Sarah announced. "Impossible," the calculator protested. "The mathematical calculator," Sarah said with a smile that had no warmth in it. "You're about to see human mathematics. We don't calculate what's possible. We make impossible things happen through sheer bloody-mindedness." Sarah cut the connection and turned to her staff. "Give me a fleet-wide channel." "Channel open, Admiral. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. We have 18 hours to evacuate 50 million people from the Nexus of Altair. I know our fleet can't handle that many refugees. I know the plague will be here soon. I know the odds are impossible, but impossible odds are what humans do best." She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew. "The Nexus contains treasures from every species in the galaxy. Art and music and knowledge that can never be replaced. But more importantly, it contains people. Living beings with families and dreams and hopes for the future. We're going to save them all." The response was immediate. Every ship in the human fleet signaled their readiness to begin the operation, but Sarah was not finished. "Send a message on all frequencies," she ordered. "Address it to every ship, every station, every government in this sector. Tell them that humanity is conducting an evacuation of the Nexus. Tell them that anyone who wants to help is welcome. Tell them that this is their chance to choose who they really are." The message went out across dozens of star systems. For an hour, nothing happened. Sarah began to think that humanity would face this challenge alone, as they had faced so many others. Then the first ship arrived, a Threnody crystal singer vessel, its hull covered in rainbow patterns that shifted with its pilot's emotions. The pilot's message was simple. "My songs were born on the Nexus. I will not let them die with it." More ships followed, a squadron of young Krex warriors who had defied their elders' retreat orders. Independent traders and merchant vessels whose crews remembered human kindness during the refugee crisis. Even a few Altarian research ships whose crews had decided that mathematics meant nothing without conscience. By the time the operation began, Sarah commanded over 300 vessels from 40 different species. It was the largest multi-species fleet assembled since the formation of the Galactic Concord. The evacuation was chaos. The Nexus had never been designed to handle this kind of massive population movement. Its docking bays could accommodate only a few dozen ships at a time. The solution was typically human. They ignored the docking bays entirely. Ships of every size and configuration swarmed around the Nexus like insects around a flower. Cargo vessels extended docking tubes to residential sections. Passenger liners opened their cargo bays to receive refugee pods. Military ships used their shuttle bays to ferry people from the station to larger transports. Sarah watched the operation from the Defiance's bridge, coordinating the traffic flow and trying to ignore the countdown timer. 14 hours to evacuation completion. 16 hours until the plague arrived. The timing would be impossibly close. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the inner systems. It's the Vorthak Collective." The ancient species had not spoken to anyone outside their core world since the Silence Protocol began. Sarah wondered what had prompted them to break their silence now. The main screen showed a Vorthak representative, its ring-shaped body glowing with symbols that had not been seen for 1,000 years. "Admiral Chen," it said in a voice like cosmic wind, "the collective has observed your actions with great interest. Your species demonstrates qualities we had thought extinct in the galaxy." "What do you want?" Sarah asked bluntly. She did not have time for diplomatic pleasantries. "We wish to offer assistance," the Vorthak replied. "Our archives contain evacuation protocols developed over 1,000,000 years of existence. We are transmitting them to your fleet now." Sarah stared at the screen in shock. The Vorthak were the oldest, most cautious species in the galaxy. They had not interfered in galactic affairs for millennia. The fact that they were helping now meant something significant had changed. "Why?" Sarah asked. The Vorthak representative pulsed with colors that suggested deep emotion. "Because you have reminded us what we used to be. Before we became ancient, and careful we were young and brave, we had forgotten that survival without purpose is just another form of death." The Vorthak protocols proved invaluable. Using their techniques, the evacuation fleet was able to organize refugee flows with incredible efficiency. Population groups were sorted by biological needs and grouped with compatible species. Supply requirements were calculated to prevent shortages during the journey to safety. But even with Vorthak help, the operation was running behind schedule. The Nexus's population was simply too large to move quickly. With 4 hours remaining, they had evacuated only 30 million people. "We need more time," Sarah's operations officer reported. "At current rate, we'll need another 6 hours to complete the evacuation." Sarah studied the tactical display. The plague scouts were already in the system, seeding asteroids and empty moons with crystal growths. The main fleet would arrive exactly on schedule. There was no more time to buy. "Signal the Nexus Command Center," Sarah ordered. Tell them to prepare for emergency separation. The Nexus of Altair was not just a space station, it was a mobile platform, capable of limited movement through space. But it had not moved in over a century. Its engines were designed for positioning, not escape velocity. Admiral, the Nexus's chief engineer reported, our propulsion systems cannot achieve escape velocity with the station's current mass. We would need to jettison 80% of our structure. Then that's what we do, Sarah replied. Strip everything non-essential. Keep life support, engines, and emergency shelters. Everything else goes. What followed was the most dramatic renovation in galactic history. Entire sections of the Nexus were detached and left floating in space. Art galleries and cultural centers were abandoned to preserve residential areas. The station's beautiful outer shell was torn away to expose the functional core beneath. The transformed Nexus looked like a skeleton compared to its former glory, but it could move, and it could carry the remaining 20 million people who had not yet been evacuated. Bioship fleet detected at the edge of the system, the tactical officer announced. They'll be here in 2 hours. Sarah made the hardest decision of her military career. All civilian vessels begin immediate withdrawal to hyperspace. Military ships will escort the Nexus to the jump point. The evacuation fleet scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Hundreds of ships carrying 30 million refugees jumped to hyperspace and safety. Left behind were 40 human warships and the crippled Nexus, racing toward the system's edge at maximum speed. The Plague Fleet arrived exactly when predicted. Thousands of bioships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began pursuit. They moved with terrifying coordination, closing the distance with mechanical precision. They're jamming our hyperspace generators, the Nexus's captain reported. We can't jump until we reach the edge of their interference field. Sarah watched the pursuit develop on her tactical display. The bioships were faster than the damaged Nexus. They would catch up long before the station could escape. All ships combat formation, Sarah ordered. We're going to hold them here. The final battle for the Nexus was a running fight through the outer system. Human ships darted between asteroids and gas giant moons, using every trick they had learned in months of warfare. They fired everything they had, buying precious minutes with their lives. The bioships had evolved since the early battles. They moved with fluid grace, adapting their tactics in real time. Their weapons had become more sophisticated, able to penetrate human shields and armor with ease. One by one, the human ships fell. The destroyer Relentless was consumed by crystal growths that turned its hull into a bioship. The cruiser Determination died covering the Nexus's retreat, its crew singing Amazing Grace as their ship exploded. With only 12 ships remaining, Sarah made her final decision. This is Admiral Chen to all vessels. We're not going to make it to the jump point. But we can still complete the mission. She opened a channel to the Nexus. Captain, I'm going to ram the lead bioship. When it explodes, use the confusion to reach hyperspace. Get those people to safety. Admiral, the Nexus captain protested. There has to be another way. There is no other way, Sarah replied calmly. This is what we came here to do. Take care of our passengers. Sarah turned to her bridge crew one last time. These people had followed her through impossible battles and hopeless situations. They had never failed her, and she would not fail them now. It has been an honor, she said simply. The Defiance accelerated toward the largest bioship, a massive creature that looked like a living cathedral. Crystal spires along its hull pulsed with alien light. Weapon ports opened like flowers blooming. In hell. At the last second before impact, Sarah's communications officer looked up from his console. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Every major species is watching. They're all seeing this. Sarah smiled. Good. Let them see what happens when you choose to stand up instead of give up. The Defiance struck the bioship at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star, creating a gap in the plague formation just large enough for the Nexus to escape through. As the wounded station jumped to hyperspace, carrying 20 million refugees to safety, the remaining bioships moved to surround and consume the debris of Sarah's fleet. But the damage was already done. Across the galaxy, ancient species watched recordings of the battle and felt something they had not experienced in millennia. Shame. The Altarian Prime calculator resigned from its position, claiming that its calculations had failed to account for non-quantifiable variables. The Krex war chief called an end to the retreat and began mobilizing his warriors for war. Most importantly, the mechanical collective emerged from its self-imposed isolation and sent a single message to Earth. Analysis complete. Courage is not logical. Sacrifice is not efficient. Honor is not practical. Therefore, we choose to be illogical, inefficient, and impractical. How may we assist? The Nexus of Altair reached Earth 3 days later. The refugees it carried told their story to anyone who would listen. They spoke of human courage in the face of impossible odds. They described warriors who chose death over dishonor. They shared recordings of Sarah Chen's final battle. The galaxy began to change. Species that had hidden behind the silence protocol started to question their leaders. Young beings from ancient civilizations demanded the right to fight for their beliefs. The mathematical certainty that had governed galactic politics for millennia began to crack under the weight of human example. The plague was still spreading, still transforming worlds into crystal networks. But now it faced something new: resistance. Not just from humanity, but from species across the galaxy who had remembered what it meant to care about something more than survival. Sarah Chen was dead, but her voice echoed across the stars. Others had fallen silent, but humanity had spoken with fire, and that fire was spreading. The real war was about to begin. Dr. James Okafor coughed blood onto his laboratory console and knew he was dying. The crystal infection had spread through his nervous system over the past 3 days, turning his veins into glowing pathways of alien growth. Soon he would become another node in the Zephyrian network, his memories and knowledge absorbed into the collective. But first, he had work to finish. The makeshift research station orbited a dead star in the galactic core, hidden among the debris of ancient civilizations. James had been here for 2 months, studying samples of the plague that human forces had collected from dozens of worlds. What he had discovered would change everything. "Computer, begin final recording," he said, his voice weak but determined. The holographic recorder activated, casting blue light across the cramped laboratory. James looked directly into the lens, knowing this message would be his last gift to the galaxy. "This is Dr. James Okafor, Xenobiological Research Division, Earth Fleet. If you're watching this, then the automatic transmission system worked and I'm probably dead. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I have the data to prove it." He coughed again, crystal fragments sparkling in the blood. The infection was accelerating now, drawn by his emotional state. Fear and urgency were feeding the plague's growth. The Zephyrian plague is not an alien invasion. It's not a natural disease, it's a weapon. Specifically, it's a galactic conquered weapon, created 3,000 years ago by the founding species as a failsafe against galactic chaos. James pulled up holographic displays showing genetic comparisons and technological analyses. The evidence was overwhelming once you knew what to look for. The plague's bioships use technology that matches Altarian quantum matrices. The crystal growth patterns follow Threnody harmonic structures. The collective consciousness protocols are based on Vorthak collective memory techniques. Every major species in the Concord contributed to this weapon's creation. He paused to steady himself against the console. The crystal growths were reaching his brain now, bringing whispers of alien thoughts and collective purpose. The weapon was designed to activate if the galaxy ever faced total war or civilizational collapse. It would transform all intelligent life into a unified collective, preserving knowledge and culture while eliminating conflict. The trigger was simple. If the major species ever simultaneously withdrew from galactic governance, the weapon would interpret this as system failure and begin the transformation process. James laughed bitterly, the sound distorted by crystal formations in his throat. The Silence Protocol activated their own doomsday weapon. By retreating to their core worlds, they told the Plague that galactic civilization had failed and needed to be corrected. The laboratory's emergency lights began flashing. The station's sensors had detected incoming bioships. James had perhaps 10 minutes before they arrived to claim his research and add his consciousness to their network. But here's the thing the original designers never anticipated: humanity. We weren't part of the Concord when the weapon was created. We don't fit its parameters. The Plague can transform us, but it can't fully integrate us. We're a glitch in the system. James activated the station's communications array and began transmitting his data to every human ship in range. The Plague might take his body, but his knowledge would survive. Every time humans fight the Plague, we create chaos in its programming. Every time we save non-human refugees, we disrupt its transformation protocols. Every time we choose to sacrifice ourselves for others, we introduce variables the system can't process. The bioships were closer now, their alien songs penetrating the station's hull. James could feel their collective consciousness pressing against his mind, offering unity and peace in exchange for surrender. The Plague is dying, he continued, fighting to maintain his individuality. Human interference has corrupted its core programming. It's becoming unstable, making mistakes, showing inconsistencies. The network is fragmenting. James brought up his final analysis, the discovery that had cost him his life to verify. The Plague's central consciousness is located in the galactic core, inside an ancient Vorthak memory facility. If we can reach it, if we can introduce enough chaos into the system, we can cause a cascade failure. The entire network will collapse. The station shuddered as bioships attached to its hull. Crystal tendrils began punching through the walls, like living spears. James had only seconds left. Tell Admiral Chen, tell her that humanity was never supposed to be part of this galaxy's equation. We're the unknown variable that breaks their calculations. We're the chaos that brings freedom. The laboratory door dissolved as crystal growths consumed it. Zephyrian drones floated into the room, their metallic forms singing harmonics that made reality itself seem to bend. James felt his consciousness being pulled toward the collective, his memories and knowledge flowing out of his brain like water. But his last act was purely human. Instead of surrendering to the collective's peace, he reached for the emergency destruct button on his console. The station's reactor would take time to overload, but it would deny the Plague his research and buy time for his message to reach. Human forces, for humanity, he whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion lit up the galactic core like a supernova. By the time the light faded, James Okafor's message was already spreading through human space, carried by quantum transmissions that moved faster than the Plague could follow. Admiral Chen received the transmission aboard her new flagship, the Resilience. The original Defiance had been destroyed at the Nexus of Altair, along with Sarah Chen herself. The new Admiral Chen was Sarah's younger sister, Emma, promoted from captain after the fleet's senior officers were killed in the evacuation battle. Emma Chen was different from her sister in many ways. Where Sarah had been diplomatic and careful, Emma was direct and aggressive. Where Sarah had tried to work within the system, Emma was ready to break every rule to get results. "Assemble the fleet," Emma ordered after reviewing James's data. "All available ships, including Allied vessels. We're going to the galactic core." Her staff exchanged worried glances. The galactic core was a maze of black holes, neutron stars, and ancient space debris. No major fleet had ever successfully navigated it. The few ships that had tried were never seen again. "Admiral," her tactical officer said carefully. Current fleet strength is down to 47 human vessels. We've also got about 200 allied ships from various species, but most of them are lightly armed, against the kind of defenses the plague will have around its central facility. We'll be outnumbered 1,000 to 1, Emma finished. I know, but Dr. Okafor was right about one thing. We're the chaos in their system, and sometimes chaos is all you need. But Emma was not planning to fight this battle alone. James's discovery had changed everything. When the galaxy learned that the plague was their own creation, the careful alliances of 3 millennia began to crumble. The Altarian Prime Calculator's replacement, a younger entity calling itself the Probability Cascade, was the first to break ranks. The mathematical impossibility of our situation requires impossible solutions, it announced to the conquered assembly. Logic demands that we embrace illogic. The Threnody Empire's crystal cities began resonating with new harmonies, songs of war and redemption that had not been heard for millions of years. The Krex war chief emerged from his fortress world, leading the largest battle fleet in galactic history. Even the mysterious observers, who had remained neutral through every galactic crisis, began moving their ancient ships toward the core. But the most surprising response came from the Vorthak Collective. The ancient species had created the memory, facility where the plague's consciousness was housed. They alone knew its location and defenses. Their representative appeared before the emergency Concord session with an offer that shocked everyone. The collective accepts full responsibility for this catastrophe, the ancient being announced. We will guide the fleet to the plague's heart and assist in its destruction. This is our debt to pay. When the combined fleet assembled at the edge of the galactic core, it was the largest armada in recorded history. Over 10,000 ships from every major species, united for the first time since the Concord's founding. But they all looked to the human ships for leadership. Emma Chen stood on the bridge of the Resilience, looking at the swirling chaos of the galactic core ahead. Somewhere in that maze of gravitational distortions and ancient ruins was the plague's brain, the central consciousness that controlled the transformation of entire worlds. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast to the fleet. 3 months ago, the galaxy's leaders chose to abandon the Outer Rim to save themselves. They thought survival was more important than sacrifice. They were wrong. She paused, watching. The tactical display filled with ships from dozens of species. Humans and Altarians, Krex and Threnody, ancient Vorthak vessels and mysterious observer craft. All of them ready to follow humanity into the most dangerous region of space. Today, we're going to finish what my sister started. We're going to show this galaxy what happens when people choose courage over comfort, hope over fear, and each other over themselves. The plague thinks it can perfect us by taking away our choice. We're going to show it the power of choosing, to be imperfect. The fleet entered the galactic core in perfect formation, following Vorthak navigation charts that were older than most civilizations. The journey was treacherous. Ships were lost to black hole tides and neutron star radiation. Ancient automated defenses, built by civilizations that had died before Earth's sun was born, attacked anything that moved. But the fleet pressed on, driven by something more powerful than technology or tactics. They were driven by the example of species that had chosen to fight rather than hide, to sacrifice rather than survive, to speak with fire rather than fall silent. The plague's central facility was hidden inside an artificial structure the size of a small moon, protected by bioship fleets that numbered in the millions. The battle that followed made every previous engagement look like a skirmish. Emma Chen led the final assault personally, taking a strike force of volunteers into the facility's heart while the main fleet held off the defenders. What they found inside was both beautiful and terrifying, a vast crystalline chamber where the consciousness of billions of transformed beings existed in perfect harmony. The plague's central mind spoke to them without words, its thoughts flowing directly into their consciousness. It showed them visions of a galaxy without war, without suffering, without the chaos that came from free will. It offered them peace, unity, perfection. Emma's response was purely human. She activated the chaos virus that Dr. Okafor had designed. Introducing random variables into the plague's perfect system, the virus spread through the crystal network like wildfire, corrupting the collective consciousness with human concepts, individuality, choice, imperfection, hope. The plague's network began to collapse. Across the galaxy, bioships stopped mid-flight and began crystallizing into inert sculptures. Transformed beings on countless worlds suddenly remembered who they used to be, their individual consciousness returning like sunrise after endless night. The facility around them began to crumble, as the plague's central mind fragmented into billions of separate thoughts. Emma and her team barely escaped as the artificial moon collapsed into itself, taking the weapon that had threatened to perfect the galaxy. But Emma Chen's final transmission, broadcast from her escape pod as the facility died, became the new foundation of galactic civilization. This is Admiral Chen to all free beings in the galaxy. The plague is finished, the weapon is destroyed, but remember what we learned here. Perfection is not the goal, choice is. Chaos is not the enemy, fear is, and when darkness threatens to silence us, we answer with fire. The memorial built at the Nexus of Altair was expanded to include names from every species that had fought against the plague. But the inscription remained the same, now translated into 1,000 languages. They spoke when we fell silent. They stood when we retreated. They burned bright enough to light our way home. The silence protocol was formally abolished and replaced with the Chen doctrine. No world left behind, no voice left unheard, no fire left unlit. But perhaps the most important change was something that could not be written into law or carved into stone. The galaxy had learned that survival without purpose was just another form of death. That ancient wisdom without courage was just sophisticated cowardice. That sometimes the most logical choice was to embrace the chaos of hope over the certainty of despair. Humanity had lost billions of people in the war against the plague, but they had gained something infinitely more valuable. A galaxy that finally understood the difference between existing and living, between safety and freedom, between the silence of fear and the fire of hope. The plague was gone, but its lesson remained. In a universe full of ancient species and perfect calculations, sometimes what the galaxy needed most was the beautiful chaos of people who chose to care more about each other than about themselves. When others fell silent, humanity had spoken with fire, and that fire had lit the way home for everyone.